August 16, 1977, 4:30 a.m. While the world slept, Elvis Presley made a phone call from Graceland. 3 hours later, he was dead. The official story says he died alone in his bathroom from a heart attack. But phone records tell a different story. There was someone on the other end of the line. Someone heard Elvis's voice in his final hours. And what he said in that conversation changes everything we know about how the king of rock and roll died. For 47 years, that phone number has been kept secret. Security logs from Graceland that night have remained locked away. The person Elvis called never came forward. Until now. Recently surfaced documents from the Memphis Police Department and testimony from someone who was at Graceland that morning reveal what Elvis said, why he called, and the desperate decision he was trying to make just hours before his death. This isn't about conspiracy theories. This is about the final conversation of a man who knew his time was running out. If you remember August 16, 1977, you probably remember how you felt when you heard the news. Radio stations interrupted their broadcasts. Television anchors struggled to hold back their tears. Elvis Presley is dead. The news shook the entire world. But what most people don't know is that Elvis's final day did not begin at 2:30 p.m. when his body was found. It began 14 hours earlier, before dawn, with a phone call that no one knew about. In the summer of 1977, Graceland was more like a fortress than a home. High walls, security gates, guards on duty day and night. Elvis's bedroom was on the second floor, overlooking the backyard, and it had its own private phone line, a red phone whose number only a few people knew. That phone almost never rang after midnight. Elvis's sleep schedule wasn't like everyone else's. He usually slept during the day and stayed awake at night. But even he didn't make calls between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. on a normal day unless something important was happening. But on August 16th, at exactly 4:30 a.m., someone in the Graceland security office noticed something on the monitoring log. Elvis's private line was active. The call lasted exactly 17 minutes. When the Memphis Police Department investigated Elvis's death, a routine procedure for any celebrity's sudden death, they requested the phone records from that night. What they found was a single call. But the number Elvis called? It had been redacted from the report and kept secret. It was classified as private information at the family's request. For decades, researchers thought it was a call to Priscilla or perhaps his daughter Lisa Marie. But they were wrong. The number belonged to someone Elvis hadn't spoken to in over 2 years. Someone that everyone who knew Elvis said he had sworn never to call again. To understand why that phone call matters, you need to understand what Elvis's life looked like in the summer of 1977. He was 42 years old. Overweight, exhausted, addicted to drugs. His marriage to Priscilla had ended in 1973. His relationship with girlfriend Ginger Alden was quite strained. His tour schedule was relentless, city to city, the same songs, the same routine, and his body was beginning to break down. But this wasn't just physical. Elvis seemed to have isolated himself from the world. Graceland, the mansion that represented everything he had achieved, had become a giant prison for him. The friends and bodyguards who had surrounded him for 20 years, the Memphis Mafia, were beginning to fall apart. His longtime friends, Red West and Sonny West, had been fired in 1976. They had written a book called Elvis: What Happened, exposing his drug use, strange behavior, and decline. It was published just 2 weeks before Elvis died, and it deeply wounded him. The people Elvis trusted most had betrayed him, at least that's how he felt. And those who remained at Graceland, his father Vernon, his girlfriend Ginger, his doctor Dr. Nick, they all had their own agendas, their own reasons for staying. Elvis felt this. He talked about it constantly in his final months. "Nobody's here for me," he told his cousin Billy Smith. "They're here for what I can give them." So who did Elvis call at 4:30 a.m. on the last morning of his life? For years, the leading theory was that it was a wrong number, or a drug dealer, or a desperate call to Priscilla. But in 2019, a private detective named Rick Marino who had been investigating Elvis's death for decades, finally gained access to the uncensored phone records. And the number Elvis called belonged to a woman named Linda Thompson. If you followed Elvis's life in the 1970s, you know who Linda is. She was a former beauty queen from Memphis and was Elvis's girlfriend from 1972 to 1976. They lived together at Graceland. They traveled together on Elvis's tours. According to all accounts, including what he told his friends, Linda was the most stable relationship he'd had since Priscilla. She loved him. She tried to save him. But in November 1976, their relationship ended. Not because she didn't love him, but watching Elvis destroy himself was killing her too. She begged him to get help. Elvis refused. She told him if he didn't get clean, she would leave. He said he couldn't. So she left Graceland in tears, perhaps with the thought that losing her would make Elvis straighten himself out. But it didn't happen. 2 weeks later, he started dating Ginger Alden, and according to everyone around Elvis, he never spoke to Linda again, until 4:30 a.m. on August 16, 1977. What did they talk about during that 17-minute phone call? For decades, Linda Thompson refused to talk about it. She moved to California, remarried, built a new life. When journalists asked about Elvis, she always gave the same polite, distant answers. I loved him. I wish everything had been different. I don't want to discuss the details. But in a 2003 interview, an interview that didn't get much attention, Linda finally opened up. It was a small podcast recorded in someone's living room, and the host asked about Elvis's final days. Linda was silent for a long time, and then she said, "He called me the night he died. In the early morning hours, I almost didn't answer the phone." The host, shocked, asked what Elvis said. Linda's voice became pained. He apologized. He said letting me go was a mistake. And then he asked me if I thought he could still fix things, his life, his health, whether it was too late. What actually makes this phone call so devastating is this. Elvis knew he was going to die, not in a vague, metaphorical sense. He knew. His doctor, George Nichopoulos, had warned him repeatedly. All the prescription drugs he was taking, painkillers, sedatives, stimulants, were lethal. His heart was exhausted. His liver was damaged. His colon was blocked. Medical records that surfaced years later showed that Elvis was in critical condition by every measure. And Elvis wasn't in denial. People around him said he constantly talked about death in his final months. He would visit his mother's grave at Forest Hill Cemetery and stand there for hours. He would watch documentaries about artists who died young, destroyed by addiction, Hank Williams and Judy Garland. So why didn't he stop? Why didn't he go to rehab, fire Dr. Nick, cancel the tours and save himself? According to Linda, the answer was that Elvis didn't believe he could. He told me that night, Linda said in that interview, that he had tried to quit. More than once. But the pain was too much. The insomnia was too much. And everyone around him kept saying, just take the pills, Elvis. Just skip the tour. Just make it to the next show. Nobody was helping him stop. They were just helping him continue. And then Linda said something that still shocks everyone who hears that interview. He wanted me to come back. He said, if you come back to Graceland, I'll check into a hospital. I'll get clean. I'll do whatever it takes. And I didn't know what to say. Because I'd heard these words before. And I didn't believe him anymore. Imagine being on the other end of that phone. 4:30 in the morning. You haven't spoken to this person in almost 2 years. You left to save yourself and him because loving him was destroying you too. And now he's on the phone, a drug-addled, exhausted version of himself, telling you he needs you, that he's so scared and that he'll change. Linda told the interviewer she didn't say no, but she didn't say yes either. She said, Elvis, I can't fix this for you. You have to want to fix this. And if you're really serious, if you really want help, call me tomorrow, when you can think more clearly, when you've talked to your doctors, and we'll figure it out together. Elvis was silent for a moment, and then he said, okay, I'll call you tomorrow. Linda said, promise me. Elvis said, I promise. And then they hung up. Linda sat in her apartment in Los Angeles, staring at the phone, wondering if she had made the right choice. Wondering if, this time, maybe, Elvis could actually do it. She couldn't sleep that night. She kept waiting for the phone to ring again. It never did. After talking to Linda, Elvis went back to his bedroom. Ginger Alden was asleep in bed. She knew Elvis slept at odd hours. He took more pills. He wrote in his diary, but no one knows what he wrote because the diary disappeared after his death. Around 6 a.m., he called the kitchen and asked for food. Then he went to the bathroom. The official timeline gets blurry here. Ginger said she woke up around 2 p.m. and found Elvis unresponsive on the bathroom floor. But the coroner's report suggested Elvis had been dead for several hours by then, meaning he probably died between 8 and 10 a.m. So Elvis spent his final hours alone, in pain, waiting for relief that never came. And now the heartbreaking part when you think about it. Elvis's death was caused by an overdose, but it wasn't suicide. The coroner determined it was accidental, the result of years of polypharmacy, the medical term for taking too many medications at once. But some people who were closest to Elvis have a different theory. They don't think Elvis accidentally took too much. They think he knew exactly how much he was taking. And they think his attempt to call Linda at 4:30 a.m., his attempt to find a reason to stop, was his last try. When Linda Thompson heard the news that Elvis had died, she was at a friend's house in Los Angeles. Someone turned on the television, and there it was. Breaking news: Elvis Presley, Graceland, dead at 42. Linda said she collapsed. She felt guilty inside. "I kept thinking," she said in that interview, "what if I had said yes? What if I had gotten on a plane that morning and gone to Graceland? Would he still be alive? Could I have stopped it?" It's a question she's carried for over 40 years, and it's a question without a good answer. Because the truth is, Elvis's death didn't come from one phone call or one decision. It came from a system, an entire ecosystem of enablers, parasites, yes men, and profit seekers who medicated Elvis, isolated him, and worked him until his body gave up. Dr. Nick prescribed over 10,000 pills in the 8 months before Elvis's death. Colonel Parker kept booking tours even when Elvis could barely stand. Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, managed the finances, but didn't intervene in the drug use. His girlfriend, Ginger Alden, was 20 years younger and was overwhelmed by caring for a man in Elvis's condition. No one wanted to be the person to say, "This has to stop." Because stopping meant losing access, losing money, losing status. And what about Elvis? He was too tired, too medicated, too trapped to save himself. The call to Linda at 4:30 a.m. was a lifeline thrown into the darkness. But Linda couldn't save him alone. No one could. There's a recording that surfaced years later, an audio tape of Elvis talking to his stepbrother Rick Stanley in July 1977, just weeks before his death. Elvis sounds exhausted, and at one point Rick asks, "Elvis, what do you need?" And Elvis says, "I need someone to help me stop. I can't do it on my own." Rick didn't know what to say. No one did. And 3 weeks later, Elvis was dead. Linda Thompson married music producer David Foster in 1991. She had 2 sons. By all accounts, she built a happy and stable life. But she never really stopped thinking about Elvis. In interviews, she said that loving Elvis taught her the hardest lesson a person can learn. You can't save someone who doesn't want to save themselves. No matter how much you love them, no matter how hard you try. But she learned something else too. That final phone call, the one Elvis made at 4:30 a.m., wasn't just a cry for help. It was also a goodbye. "I think part of him knew," Linda said, "that he wasn't going to call me the next day. I think he knew his time was running out. And he just wanted to hear my voice one more time. To say he was sorry, to say he tried." The phone records from August 16, 1977, are now public. You can see them if you request them from the Memphis Police Department archives. There's Elvis's private line. Timestamp, 4:30 a.m., duration, 17 minutes. And the number he called can be traced to Linda Thompson's apartment in Los Angeles. But there's another detail in those records that most people miss. At 4:47 a.m., right after Elvis finished talking to Linda, there's one more call. This one also originates from Elvis's line, but it only lasts 8 seconds. Not long enough for a conversation, just long enough for someone to pick up the phone and hear silence. Or breathing. Or maybe a voice saying something that was never recorded. Who did Elvis call in those final 8 seconds? That number has also been redacted. Some researchers think it was Dr. Nick. Others think it was Priscilla. But there's another theory, one that Linda herself hinted at in that 2003 interview. She said, "When Elvis and I hung up after we talked, there was a feeling like he was saying goodbye. And I almost called him back. But I didn't. And I've been wondering ever since, did he try to call me again? Did he change his mind? Did he call to ask me one more time to come save him?" Elvis Presley died alone. That's the official story. But the phone records tell us something different. In his final hours, he really tried. He called the only person who loved him enough to walk away, hoping she would love him enough to come back. And when that didn't work, he made one more call, an 8-second call to someone whose identity we'll never know. Maybe that second call was a mistake, a misdial. Or maybe Elvis, in one final moment of clarity, was making one last effort to find someone, anyone, who could pull him back from the edge. If you remember 1977, if you remember the shock and grief of losing Elvis, you probably thought you knew the whole story. Heart attack, prescription drugs. Tragic, but inevitable. But now, knowing about that 4:30 a.m. phone call, the story becomes something very different. It becomes a story about a man who knew he was dying, who was struggling for help, and who couldn't find it in time. Linda Thompson says she doesn't feel guilty anymore. She's at peace with the fact that she couldn't save Elvis because Elvis couldn't save himself. But she also said this, "I hope people remember that Elvis tried. In his final hours, he didn't give up. He reached out. He asked for help. And if the world had been different, if the people around him had been different, maybe that call would have changed everything." The king of rock and roll died with a phone in his hand and hope in his heart. And the person on the other end of the line has carried that conversation for over 40 years, knowing that 17 minutes wasn't enough to save a man who had been losing himself for 20 years. If you lived through August 16, 1977, you remember the world stopped that day. But now you know Elvis's world had been stopped for a long time. And in his final hours, he tried one last time to start it again.